Fate was a broke loser who was treated like a dumpster for having a useless skill. However, after a hot night saves him from being homeless, he develops the ability to steal any skill he wants, but pretends to be ordinary so he can clap her while secretly getting revenge on his bullies. It all started with Fate playing security guard at the city gate, but this fool's stomach kept making sounds louder than a broken washing machine. There, he overheard adventurers talking about their hunt, but couldn't relate since he only had a useless skill called gluttony, which always kept him hungry. Just then, some knights rolled up to his guard post and began kicking him like a soccer ball for being useless. Luckily for him, a girl named Roxy appeared and told these knights they were supposed to protect people, not treat them like punching bags. After the bullies finally left, Roxy told Fate to let her know if those morons ever tried that garbage again. But he was used to getting treated like dirt and awkwardly excused himself. He went to grab some food, but on his way back, his stomach started making those embarrassing sounds again, and he wished he'd been born with any other skill instead of this cursed ability. Out of nowhere, he spotted some ninja thieves running around and quickly went to tell Roxy, who immediately rushed toward the action, leaving him behind to guard the gate. While he waited for her to come back, this idiot was shocked to see one of the thieves charging straight at him. When the thief got close enough, Fate stabbed him with his spear and sent the guy straight to the Shadow Realm. But then something wild happened. His gluttony skill suddenly activated like it had been waiting for this moment, and he gained new abilities called telepathy and identity, which left him more confused. While he stood there, Roxy returned and asked if he was okay, but when he realized he could hear her inner thoughts, he nearly had a mental breakdown. However, she thanked him for taking down one of the bad guys and offered him a new job in the Hart family, assuring him freedom from this miserable life. So he accepted. The next day, he headed to a weapons store, but when he mentioned his budget was 2 silver coins, the seller called him broke and pointed him toward the cheap stuff section. Using his new identify skill, he found a thick black longsword that looked as rejected and forgotten as he felt. The sword suddenly talked and called himself Greed, before convincing him to buy him, promising it would be worth his time. Meanwhile, 2 of the holy knights who'd bullied Fate earlier were gossiping about Roxy's decision to hire him into the Hart family. Memel suggested they mess with Roxy for thinking she could steal their personal punching bag, but Rafal told her not to stress about it. Rafal then got up to leave, which made Memel ask why he was so excited about studying. He casually mentioned he was researching how to become immortal, but she just laughed it off thinking he had watched too much animes. On the other side of town, Fate was still getting acquainted with his chatty new weapon when a goblin jumped out of nowhere. As he eliminated the green menace, he instantly gained a new skill. More goblins showed up like they were having a family reunion, and as he took them out one by one, he kept unlocking new abilities. Suddenly, Fate realized his stomach had finally stopped making embarrassing noises, so he asked Greed if people were stuck with whatever skills they were born with forever. Greed explained that his new abilities were all thanks to his gluttony skill, which stole skills of his enemies whenever he defeated them. Greed then warned that no one should find out about this skill, causing Fate to panic because it meant he had to fight alone. But Greed assured him that he was there for him. After collecting the goblin's ears, he headed to the guild to exchange them for actual money. When he got back from the guild, he was very excited because this was the most money he had made in his broke life. But while he thought about what food to blow his money on, he spotted some sketchy dude dragging around a terrified girl who looked like she'd rather be anywhere else. His danger senses started tingling, so he used his identify skill to check the guy's stats, and when he saw this wasn't just some random creep, he took off after them like his life depended on it. Meanwhile, the poor girl found herself chained up in some crusty warehouse. The kidnapper started running his mouth, bragging about how she was about to become a plaything for the holy knights. Fate was lurking in the shadows like Batman's broke cousin, but Greed had to hold him back from going full hero mode. The sword explained that this guy was actually stronger than Fate's weak behind, and suggested he just walk away and mind his own business. But our boy Fate had apparently watched too many hero anime and decided he was gonna help anyone suffering in front of him, especially now that he had some decent power-ups. Meanwhile, some old nun giving a lesson to a bunch of orphans about Holy Laplace, the world's creator who apparently had better things to do than stick around. She told them about how Laplace bounced from the world but left behind special powers called skills. She also dropped some lore about the good old days when there were no skills and everything was peaceful, which sounded like boomer talk to the Yunjins. Another nun burst into the room, announcing that one of the orphans had gone missing. She yeeted herself out of there to continue searching, while the first nun wondered where this girl named Sa'ara had disappeared to. Plot twist: the kidnapped girl was actually Sa'ara, and when the kidnapper left to probably grab some snacks, Fate saw his chance to play hero. He swooped in to rescue the girl, but the kidnapper appeared behind him. The creep called Fate foolish and told him he had zero chance of winning, which was basically asking to get proven wrong by anime logic. Fate wanted to get the girl to safety but was standing there. Greed, being the voice of reason for once, told him to step back, use the kidnapper's overconfidence against him, and wait for the perfect moment to strike. He tried to escape with Saara, but they ended up at a dead end because apparently Fate's navigation skills were as bad as his luck used to be. Left with no choice, Fate launched a surprise attack, and as the kidnapper prepared to use his skill, Greed told his host to go full aggressive mode and strike head-on. Fate charged and delivered a hit that actually connected. The defeated kidnapper was now at Fate's mercy, but when our boy demanded answers, the guy refused to talk. So Fate decided to get creative with some enhanced interrogation techniques until the kidnapper finally spilled that some dude named Hato had ordered the kidnapping. After all that action, Saara's stomach decided to make its presence known with some aggressive growling, so Fate took her to grab some food before returning her to the orphanage. The girl thanked him, and Fate was genuinely shocked because it was literally the first time anyone had shown him gratitude. He approached Saara and dropped some wisdom his father had given him, but which he'd been too dense to understand before. No matter how rough life gets, if you can laugh it off, you'll eventually find happiness. On the way back, Greed congratulated Fate on unlocking his first technical skill, the one-handed sword technique, which was basically a cheat code that let him attack twice in one strike. Fate thought he'd just gotten lucky against the kidnapper and was determined to get stronger so he wouldn't have to rely on Arang in future fights. The next day, Fate rolled up to the Hart family estate where Roxy greeted him at the gate, and he nearly had a system error from how good she looked. She took him to her recently deceased father's grave, revealing that he'd been isekai 5 days ago in Galia. Apparently, Galia was a continent overrun by monsters, and it was the Holy Knight's job to keep them in check like some kind of supernatural pest control service. Roxy explained that this duty had fallen to the Hart family this year, but unfortunately, a divine dragon had decided to end its 1,000-year Netflix binge and wiped out the entire group led by her father. She told him she was now the head of the house and was looking forward to working with him. As they were about to shake hands, Fate remembered his telepathy would activate, so he pointed at some random person instead. They met the chief maid, Haru, who reminded Fate to act like a proper servant and not embarrass the Hart family name. A week passed with Fate grinding through the hardest labor. He was chatting with other servants when his stomach started making sounds that shocked everyone since they'd literally just finished lunch. Roxy called for him, but his stomach kept performing its aggressive symphony, and even Fate was confused about why he was turning into a walking black hole. Roxy tried to have a normal conversation with him, but all he could think about was why he was so hungry he could probably eat a whole cow. She snapped him back to reality, and they bonded over their dead fathers who'd both been monster chow. When she considered him family, Fate got flustered but then promptly passed out like his brain had blue screened. He woke up in his room with a note from Roxy telling him to take the day off. Fate questioned Greed about his ridiculous hunger, and Greed revealed it was due to gluttony kicking in. The more souls Fate consumed, the stronger he'd become, but his appetite would also grow until he was basically destined to spend his life hunting for souls like a supernatural foodie. Greed explained that when his hunger hit maximum levels, his eyes would turn red as a warning sign. Fate checked and realized his eyes were indeed red, which explained why he'd been looking at people like they were menu items. He went outside and walked past a group of people while thinking they smelled delicious, as Greed explained that his hunger boost had activated because he was basically starving for souls. Greed clarified that this was a temporary power-up designed to help him hunt prey, and he could track targets by scent while weaker enemies would be paralyzed by fear. They ventured outside the kingdom and found several goblins who were absolutely terrified. Fate proceeded to massacre them all before heading toward the Hobgoblin Forest, where he continued his isekai spree for several hours until his hunger was finally satisfied. But because animes can't let protagonists have nice things, a Goblin King appeared out of nowhere and using his Identify skill. He realized that their stats were almost equal, but the Goblin King had a health regeneration skill. Fate went after the boss monster and was disgusted to see it devouring a human. He launched a surprise attack that sliced off its arm, and the fight continued with Fate mostly dodging attacks. Greed told him to stop being passive and go on the offensive, so Fate charged in and somehow managed to overpower the boss before landing the finishing blow. His stats increased significantly, and he gained the health regeneration skill. Greed revealed that with Fate's current stats, he could unlock Greed's first evolution in exchange for all his accumulated power. Greed explained that the first level would give him new functions, but Fate was shocked to learn he'd have to sacrifice every stat he'd gained since they met. Greed dropped the ultimatum that Fate would lose the right to wield him if he didn't unlock this upgrade, so Fate reluctantly agreed to the trade. He began the process and felt his power draining away as Greed transformed into a magic bow that looked way cooler than his sword form. Greed informed him that there was a goblin watching them and taught him how to use the bow, which created magic arrows whenever he pulled the string. The weapon was basically an aimbot since the arrows would always hit their target regardless of where he aimed. Fate collected the Goblin King's ears as proof of his victory and left them at the orphanage door because he figured they needed the bounty money more than he did. The next day, Fate intercepted what he thought was some random intruder trying to break into their spot, But plot twist, it was actually Roxy cosplaying as a broke peasant. She dragged Fate along for her little undercover boss episode, and during their stroll to town, she asked to peep his sword. Bro immediately started sweating bullets, probably thinking she'd discover his weapon was suspicious. When the sword slipped from his butterfingers, Roxy caught it. Thankfully for Fate's anxiety levels, she didn't notice anything weird about it and just told him his blade needed some serious TLC. She promised to hook him up with the Hart family's blacksmith. They finally rolled up to the town and posted up at some market stall when the entire crowd suddenly turned into mannequins. A holy night was approaching, and everyone acted like the Grim Reaper himself had just clocked in for work. Right on cue, Fate's stomach decided to throw its own little concert, growling loud enough and pissing off the holy knight something fierce. The armored psychopath tried to stomp on Fate, but Roxy jumped in faster than a mom protecting her jit from a flying baseball. Now everyone was staring at Roxy harder than paparazzi at a celebrity wedding, trying to figure out if this budget-dressed girl was actually the real Roxy. Greed whispered that they pretend to be a couple so nobody would suspect. Roxy overheard this mastermind plan when Fate responded to his invisible sword buddy and decided to roll with it. They started acting all lovey-dovey, convincing the crowd that there was no way this random Conner chick could be their precious Roxy. While everyone was distracted by their Oscar-worthy performance, the fake couple slipped away and ducked into a corner to catch their breath. Fate's mind-reading powers picked up on Roxy's internal monologue about her heart doing backflips because this was apparently her first time playing arm candy with any dude. She snapped back to mission mode and decided they needed to keep moving before someone figured out their little charade. As they wandered around, they caught wind of some juicy gossip about a massacre of dead goblins that had been discovered recently. The rumor mill was spinning tales about some wandering monster going full psycho mode, but nobody could explain why someone had been generous enough to donate all those goblin ears to the orphanage in the slums. Roxy got curious about this mysterious monster situation and asked Fate to escort her to wherever the local warriors like to hang out and compare war stories. Fate led her to the neighborhood bar, where the bartender spilled some tea about a warrior who basically hit the lottery when he stumbled across a mountain of goblin corpses with their ears still perfectly attached. Roxy theorized that some out-of-town monster had probably crashed the local goblin party, while the bartender started crying about his business going down the drain. Apparently, merchants were too spooked to travel through goblin plains anymore because nobody wanted to risk becoming monster food. Some old geezer wandered into the bar and decided to join their little detective circle, dropping the bombshell that the mystery killer was actually a lich. He explained that this was exactly why the Holy Knights were handling the situation personally instead of letting some random adventurers play hero. A group of warriors burst through the door and immediately started hitting on Roxy, probably thinking she was just some cute peasant girl they could impress. Roxy gave one of them what she thought was a gentle little push, but the dude went flying across the room. The warriors' brains started working overtime as they realized only someone with Holy Knight level strength could send a grown man into orbit with a love tap. Roxy finally dropped her disguise, and the warriors immediately switched to panic mode, trying to throw all their money at her. She shut down their pathetic bribery attempt and gave them a whole inspirational speech about her dream world where commoners and holy knights could actually hang out without anyone getting their face rearranged. They made their way to the blacksmith, who worked his magic on greed until the sword looked fresher than a newly minted coin. While they toured the town, Roxy explained that she'd been completely in the dark about the monster hunt because the Vlerix family had decided to keep her out of the loop. Meanwhile, Hado, who was clutching some random jit and spinning a story about how he was just being a good Samaritan by taking this lost youngin under his protection. Fate wasn't buying this obvious kidnapping setup and snatched the boy away faster than a protective parent. While Roxy announced they'd be handling the situation from here, Roxy confronted Raphael about being left out of the monster hunting committee meeting, and he served up some weak excuse about not wanting to bother her while she was supposedly busy mourning her dead father. The Vlerix crew decided to bounce while Fate and Roxy play family reunion coordinators, helping the Jit find his mom and get his happy ending. Back at home base, Fate cornered Greed for some advice on how to go monster hunting without Roxy figuring out he was moonlighting as a vigilant. The next day, Greed dropped some knowledge about perception warping masks that would basically give Fate a whole new face to anyone who looked at him. Meanwhile, in some sketchy back room that looked like a villain's lair, Raphael had gathered his knights, discussing their upcoming field trip to Gelia. Sometime later, a squad of warriors stumbled across another goblin graveyard and looked up to see what they probably thought was the Angel of Death himself, a lich chilling on top of a mountain of corpses. The terrified warriors took one look at this nightmare fuel, screamed something about a corpse, and ran away faster than dudes fleeing a haunted house. The next day, Roxy rolled up to Fate and dropped the bombshell that she had a secret mission for him. They hopped into a carriage and cruised through the Hart family's vineyard, eventually pulling up to their destination where Roxy's mom, Aisha, was waiting at the door. Roxy introduced Fate as her latest employee acquisition, and Aisha immediately went full interrogation mode, asking Fate if he had the hots for her daughter. Both of them turned redder than ripe tomatoes before Aisha clarified that she just wanted his professional opinion on Roxy as a boss. Fate delivered some next-level devotion by declaring he'd serve her until his dying breath, which left Roxy looking like someone had just professed their undying love in the middle of a Walmart, so she dipped in embarrassment. Fate found himself playing farmhand with the other servants, harvesting grapes while they gave him the full historical rundown about how the lords had been personally babying this land for generations. Everyone was practically glowing with pride about helping their noble overlords. One servant casually mentioned that hunting season was about to kick off because kobolds always crash the harvest party looking for free meals. Fate's stomach decided to throw its own little tantrum again, while Greed explained that his gluttony was getting pickier than a food critic. Apparently, goblin souls were no longer cutting it for his increasingly demanding appetite. On the journey home, Fate spotted some mysterious chick wielding an axe that looked like it could split a mountain in half. As she strolled past, Fate nearly had a heart attack when he realized she had the same creepy red eyes as him. He tried to run his little stat-checking ability on her, but it came up with nothing. The girl gave him a quick look and mentioned something about being too early, which left Fate more confused than a tourist without GPS. She told him he could have dibs on the kobolds, but that he now owed her big time, promising they'd meet again. Roxy caught up and pointed out that the mystery girl was a galleon, which apparently was a bigger deal than spotting a unicorn. She explained that Galleon used to be some military powerhouse 1,000 years ago, but when the monster apocalypse hit, their entire nation got wiped off the map. Seeing a survivor was like finding a living dinosaur. As they headed back, Fate started worrying about Roxy going monster hunting solo, but she brushed off his concerns, reminding him that she'd have backup and that playing monster exterminator was literally in her job description as a holy knight. The next day, everyone was playing hide and seek in the bushes, preparing to hunt some kobolds, when a massive monster decided to crash their little party uninvited. Fate's mouth started watering like he was staring at a 5-star meal, but Greed knew they had a serious problem because Fate was basically one step away from going full feral mode from starvation. Fate panicked about Roxy witnessing his monster appetite and quickly checked the beast's stats, discovering it was a level 50 nightmare with numbers that would make a calculator cry. This thing was called a crown beast, and Greed explained it was basically a monster born from pure accumulated rage. They retreated to the village where everyone started losing their minds, because they knew they stood about as much chance as a snowball in Hades. But Roxy managed to calm the crowd down with some motivational speech about how she personally sent this monster to the Shadow Realm. She announced they'd return the next day for round 2, while Greed privately noted they were all basically signing their death certificates. However, Fate was not going to let Roxy become Monster Chow, so he decided to go full lone wolf and handle this himself. That night, he discovered the Crown Beast had a whole kobold fan club surrounding it, and Greed wondered what kind of self-Eastek High mission Fate was planning. He started picking off the smaller monsters with his bow, absorbing their stats with his gluttony ability. When he tried sniping the main boss, the beast used one of its minions as a human shield. Fate switched to close combat, slicing and dicing his way through more kobolds while his stats scaled through the roof. He thought he could finally take down the boss with his bow, but the beast caught his arrow. He prepared for sword-to-claw combat, but the Crown Beast unleashed some shockwave attack that sent Fate flying like he'd been hit by a freight train. He hit the ground and played dead while a kobold came to finish the job, only to get the surprise of its life when Fate revealed he'd been faking unconsciousness. After absorbing another kobold's stats, Greed announced that Fate could finally unlock his first hidden technique, but it would cost him 10% of his current stats. Fate accepted the deal, and his bow got a magical makeover that would make any archer jealous. He fired one shot that absolutely obliterated the Crown Beast in a single hit, making him wonder if he'd gone a little overboard with the overkill. His gluttony skill activated, but instead of feeling satisfied, Fate experienced pain that felt like someone was rearranging his internal organs with a rusty spoon. Greed explained this was his first time consuming a premium soul, and warned him that losing control would make his previous starvation state look like a minor inconvenience. Fate tried to tough it out, but the agony was so intense he ended up screaming. The next day, the warriors arrived at what looked like a supernatural crime scene and started theorizing about magic arrows being responsible for the massacre. Roxy was there too, wondering who could possibly have enough firepower to turn a mini army into monster confetti. She remembered the mysterious axe girl from before and figured she must have been the one behind this one-woman apocalypse. Roxy told Fate she was ready to head back to the capital, while Aisha noticed how her daughter's face lit up brighter than a Christmas tree whenever she talked to him. Later, Aisha pulled Fate aside for a heart-to-heart, telling him to always have Roxy's back and take care of her. She explained that prestige and authority meant absolutely nothing compared to his desire to help Roxy, and since she didn't have much time left, she basically appointed him as Roxy's unofficial guardian angel. On the ride home, Fate started having an existential crisis about Aisha's request, especially since he was hiding more secrets than a government agency. That evening, Fate discovered his eyes were still glowing red even after his goblin slaughtering spree, and Greed delivered the bad news that goblin souls were no longer satisfying his hunger, so he needed to upgrade to premium monster meals before he lost complete control and went full psycho mode. Later, Fate was drowning his sorrows at some tavern when he decided he was too much of a fraud to stand beside Roxy while keeping such massive secrets from her. An old drunk wandered in and started complaining about Hado joining the leech hunt, clearly harboring enough hatred to fuel a small war. The geezer wished Hado would get shipped off to the Gallia expedition and become monster food, which shocked Fate because he couldn't believe they were planning another self-isekai so soon after Roxy's father had barely gotten cold in his grave. The plot twist was that Roxy had been chosen as Hado's replacement. In the Heart's mansion, Roxy at her father's grave, having a one-sided conversation about being selected for the Gallia expedition, Fate showed up and basically begged her not to go on what was obviously a death sentence, but Roxy had already made up her mind with the stubbornness of someone who'd rather die than admit they were wrong. Meanwhile, the Vleriks were popping champagne and throwing a party because they were about to get rid of their Roxy problem permanently. The other siblings decided to bounce and leave the dirty work to Hado while they headed off to some place called Tenburn. Hado tried to squeeze some immortality secrets out of Raphael. The guy just told him to focus on not getting eaten by the leech first. Meanwhile, Fate was standing alone in the middle of some empty plains, wrestling with the fact that he couldn't interfere with official Holy Knight business. But he finally decided he'd had enough of watching the Holy Knights treat people like disposable trash and was ready to do something about it. A couple of hours later, Hado rolled up with his squad of wannabe tough guys and ordered them to jump Fate, probably thinking numbers would save his pathetic behind. But Fate handled them easily, leaving Hado watching in absolute horror as his backup got demolished. The rest of his crew took one look at the carnage and ran away, while Hado tried to salvage what was left of his dignity by declaring he wouldn't let some corpse make him look like a complete joke. Fate decided it was time for the big reveal and ripped off his mask, leaving Hado wondering how some random nobody like him had turned into a walking weapon of mass destruction. Hado started flexing about his Holy Knight status, so Fate basically challenged him to put his money where his mouth was and actually show off these legendary powers everyone kept talking about. Fate asked Greed if he could turn a holy sword into scrap metal, and Greed told him to swing away. Hado tried pulling some holy lead attack out of his arsenal, but Fate teleported behind him. When Hado swung his sword, Fate shattered that holy blade and told him to make do with whatever was left of his broken weapon. Hado tried backing away, but gravity had other plans and sent him tumbling to the ground like a sack of potatoes. Fate grabbed him and announced it was time for some much-needed education, then proceeded to use Hado as a human wrecking ball against multiple trees, turning the forest into his personal demolition site. Hado started begging for mercy, but Fate launched him into the sky and whipped out his upgraded bow for some aerial target practice. He fired an arrow so powerful it left a hole in the clouds, and Hado came crashing down wondering why he was still breathing. Fate explained he still had some questions that needed answering, and Hado immediately assumed this was all about Roxy. He spilled the tea that she'd actually volunteered for the Gallia expedition herself and started promising to cancel the whole thing if Fate would spare his miserable life, but Fate dropped the bombshell that this wasn't about Roxy at all. This was personal revenge time, and he delivered the final blow that sent Hado to meet his maker. The gluttony skill kicked in again, blessing Fate with the Holy Sword technique, which was basically the golden ticket to becoming a Holy Knight. Greed congratulated him on his new qualification, but Fate made it clear he had zero interest in joining their corrupt little club anyway. Greed then offered him a second-level upgrade in exchange for all his current stats. Fate agreed to the deal, and Greed revealed his new form, a side that could apparently cut through anything. The next day, Roxy was preparing to leave for her expedition while everyone gathered for the world's saddest farewell party. She tried cheering everyone up by saying 3 years would fly by like a weekend vacation, which fooled absolutely nobody. When she reached Fate for their goodbye, the emotional weight was heavier than a truck full of bricks. Horror handed Fate a recommendation letter that Roxy had left behind so he could find work at some lord's mansion, but Fate rejected it, announcing he was switching careers to become a warrior. That night, Fate began planning his own little field trip to Gallia to play backup for Roxy, because letting her go alone was never really an option. As he left the capital, some mysterious girl was watching and commenting about how things were falling into place perfectly. Meanwhile, Roxy was giving her usual TED Talk motivation to her expedition troops about their mission to take down the Divine Dragon, who had apparently decided to wake up from his nap and cause problems. She was happy to see that a girl named Miria and some guy named Mugen had joined her Self Isekai squad. Miria called Mugen a complete nutcase for wanting to test his strength against a literal dragon, but Mugen explained he was there to avenge Roxy's father. Roxy asked if his family was cool with him going on this death mission, and Mugen revealed his daughter couldn't care less as long as he brought back some fancy galleon souvenirs. Fit to his daughter Rain, who was working in some lab surrounded by the goblin corpses that Fate had been collecting. She discovered that some of the wounds came from magic arrows fired by the Black Sword, one of the legendary weapons of mortal sin. Rain explained that these weapons were made from special materials that could manipulate magic power, potentially expanding skill possibilities beyond normal limits. She was basically fangirling over the chance to see one of these legendary weapons in person. Fate arrived at the merchant city of Tetra, revealing he'd been there before. He found out the carriage to Galia wouldn't leave until the next day, so he decided to spend his time gathering intel. At the local tavern, he witnessed some guy begging a group of warriors for help, but they told him his money wasn't good enough and started bullying him. Fate beat them up faster than a whack-a-mole game and sent them running with their tails between their legs. Surprisingly, the guy he rescued turned out to be his old friend Set. A flashback revealed that young Fate had been the village punching bag because his stomach growled more than a hungry bear, but he'd had a solid relationship with his father before monsters turned him into Monster Chow. His dad had been a spear-wielding warrior, which was the only reason the village chief kept them around in the first place. After his father's death, nobody wanted to deal with Fate, so the village chief basically told him to get lost and never come back. Back in the present, Set was begging Fate for help, but Fate wasn't feeling particularly charitable since Set was the village chief's son, the same chief who kicked him out like yesterday's garbage. He only agreed to help because his gluttony needed feeding, and the monsters attacking the village sounded like an all-you-can-eat buffet. They arrived at the village where the chief was less than thrilled to see Set had brought back the weakling he'd exiled years ago. Set tried vouching for Fate's strength after witnessing him demolish those warriors, but the chief wasn't buying it for a second. The villagers started panicking about screams coming from the nearby forest, convinced the monsters were closing in, and the chief suggested using Fate as monster bait to buy them some time. At Set's house, Set opened up about his wife getting isekai'd by monsters and how he regretted spending years thinking his father was always right. He explained how becoming a father had finally made him grow a brain and realize his dad was basically a terrible person. He told Fate the monsters had shown up about a month ago, and according to witnesses, these things could fly, which was apparently a new and terrifying development for the locals. Fate's stomach decided to throw another concert, so Set went to grab him some food. Greed said their enemies were gargoyles. He explained that gargoyles like to spy on humans first to learn how they act before attacking with a big group. Set's daughter offered Fate some candy, which he ate without thinking twice. He immediately collapsed like someone had unplugged his power cord, leaving Set and his daughter wondering what the heck just happened. The little girl revealed he'd just eaten the special candy Grandpa had given her, and Greed realized the village chief had actually poisoned Fate because he was serious about using him as monster food. Set tried waking him up while the gargoyles started approaching the village. The gargoyles decided to throw their own little housewarming party by setting the entire village on fire and turning the locals into their personal all-you-can-eat buffet. Fate was still knocked out cold from the poison, so Set whipped up an antidote to bring his friend back from the dead. When Fate finally came to, he realized they were in the middle of a monster apocalypse and rushed outside to find the village looking like it had been through a blender. He checked the gargoyles' stats and discovered these flying nightmares had a fireball skill that basically turned them into aerial flamethrowers. Greed transformed into his side form just as the gargoyles decided to combine their powers, preparing to launch a massive fireball that could probably level a city block. But Fate threw his weapon, slicing through their attack and chasing down the gargoyles, wiping them out in one clean sweep. His scythe boomeranged back to him, and he absorbed the fireball skill. The pack leader decided to make its grand entrance like it was the ultimate final boss, so Fate scanned its stats and found out this boss had both the fireball skill and fire resistance, making it the equivalent of a flying tank. Greed predicted it would try close-range fireball spam, so when the gargoyle charged at Fate, he delivered a devastating slash that cut it in half, sending it straight to monster heaven. The next day revealed that the village had been completely erased from existence like it never existed. Fate used his identify skill and discovered the soil was more toxic than a Twitter comment section, meaning nothing would ever grow there again. Set wondered why Fate was wasting his talents on the warrior life when he could make bank with his identify ability, but Fate explained he didn't have the luxury of choice in his career path. Set started feeling guilty about the whole poisoning incident and asked Fate to punch him as punishment. Fate tried throwing what he thought was a gentle love tap, but knocked Set to the ground, making him realize his strength had reached superhuman levels. He told Set to take care of his daughter, and they said their goodbyes, Later, Fate was riding shotgun in a carriage while some nervous guy reminded him that he was being paid to play bodyguard. A group of bandits decided to set up a roadblock, causing the guy to panic and beg Fate for protection. But before the bandits could even finish their threatening speeches, they got blown away by a mysterious girl who reminded Fate that he still owed her for the kobold situation. The carriage driver let her hop aboard, but the moment she climbed in, the whole thing tipped over. She told her weapon, Sloth, to return to normal weight, which fixed the balance problem instantly. Fate realized she could manipulate her weapon's weight, and the girl revealed she knew about his abilities because she wasn't so different. She also had a deadly sin skill. She introduced herself as Mine of Wrath, and her stomach immediately started growling. Fate offered her some food, but she devoured everything, leaving him with absolutely nothing. They rolled into the town of Lanchester, where some girl was trying to enter the gate but got welcomed by a ghost committee instead, causing her to scream for help. A guy named Rudolph showed up playing hero, defeating the ghosts and introducing himself as the Lord of Lanchester. Fate learned that Roxy's expedition would be hitting this town soon, and he was about to collect his bodyguard paycheck when Mine snatched it, claiming she deserved the money since she handled the bandits. However, she immediately passed out, so Fate ended up carrying her around town. While wandering around, he noticed everyone had weird symbols branded on their necks like they were part of some cult. Greed theorized that the symbols represented social classes and figured the people must really love Rudolph to let him mark them like cattle. But the reality was that Rudolph was executing his own men for failing to properly advertise his family's greatness, and the townspeople were only obeying him because the alternative was becoming monster food themselves. At the hotel, Greed revealed he knew Mine personally, and that sloth was another weapon of mortal sin. He explained that deadly sin skills were created by defying the divine Laplace system, and gluttony had the potential to completely break the normal leveling system because it could literally consume souls for power. Fate complained that his hunger was basically unsatisfiable, seeing it as punishment for his soul-eating lifestyle, and wondered why he'd been cursed with gluttony since it forced him to keep slaying just to stay alive. Greed warned him not to let his emotions run wild because gluttony could take over if his mental state got too weak, explaining that the secret to controlling his hunger was maintaining a state of near starvation while hunting regularly. He advised Fate to feed gluttony gradually instead of trying to satisfy it all at once. Just then, Sandman appeared out of nowhere, so Fate equipped his bow and cast Fireball on his arrow before firing it, instantly vaporizing the monster. Meanwhile, Mine woke up from her power nap and grabbed some food while learning about a creature called the Sand Golem that was terrorizing the town with a bounty of 100 gold on its head. Fate continued his Sandman hunting spree when he sensed something much more powerful approaching. Realizing it was time for the main course of his monster buffet, he found a group of warriors getting absolutely demolished by the Sand Golem and decided to crash their party, announcing he'd handle the situation. He checked the beast's stats and discovered it had sandstorm abilities, basically making it a living natural disaster. He immediately fired a flame arrow and charged in for close combat, but the monster pushed him back when it activated its sandstorm skill, turning the battlefield into a miniature desert apocalypse. Fate transformed his weapon into scythe mode and launched an attack that overpowered the sandstorm and destroyed the monster's body. The creature's core tried making a sneaky escape by hiding in the sand, but Fate switched back to bow mode and fired an arrow that chased the core, destroying it in an explosion. The next day, Fate collected his 100 gold bounty for the Sand Golem takedown, but Rudolph suddenly appeared and demanded that Fate serve him, explaining that refusal wasn't an option because his word was law. Mine stepped up and declared that Fate belonged to her, but Rudolph dismissed her as just some random jit. However, that was a big mistake because the random jit hit him so hard he went flying out of the room, and Fate realized they just made themselves public enemy number one. He quickly told Mine they needed to get out of town before things got even worse. They hopped back on the carriage while Fate wondered why Mine ate like she was preparing for hibernation, and she explained that anger burned calories faster than a marathon runner on steroids. When he pointed out that despite her massive appetite, she wasn't growing an inch, especially in the important places, she got so upset that she activated Sloth and almost turned the carriage into expensive firewood. While the owner tried fixing their transportation disaster, Fate wandered into a nearby village, and Greed noted the area was crawling with monsters, but figured someone was playing supernatural pest control. He met the village chief named Aaron, who turned out to be a holy knight. Aaron immediately knew Fate wanted to crash at their village and challenged him to a duel. Fate tried running his stat-checking ability, but Aaron recognized the Identify skill and revealed he could use it too, making this the world's nerdiest standoff. They started throwing hands, and Aaron managed to defeat Fate, but instead of kicking him out, Eren decided to let him stay under the condition that they'd train together, recognizing that Fate wasn't used to his ridiculous power levels and could benefit from some proper coaching. Fate accepted the deal, and Mine showed up just in time to catch Eren's attention because he could tell she was a skilled warrior just by looking at her. Eren let them both crash at the village, and the next day he was teaching Fate hand-to-hand combat. Fate struggled to land a single hit on Eren until he entered half-starvation mode, which boosted his speed enough to actually keep up with Eren's movements. That evening, Eren was staring at some distant castle while Fate noticed a family photo on the wall. Greed pointed out that Eren's son looked suspiciously similar to Fate, theorizing that his family situation had something to do with why he'd ended up playing village chief in the middle of nowhere. The next day, Eren handed Fate a twig and told him to use it for defense, then charged at him with a real sword. But Fate predicted the sword's movement and let the twig slide along the blade, deflecting the attack. Eren was genuinely impressed, saying Fate had improved faster than expected. Later, Fate announced they'd be leaving the next day and thanked Eren for not taking him out during training. He noticed Mine was too busy demolishing her dinner to pay attention, and she revealed she couldn't actually taste any of her food. Greed explained this was her punishment for having the Wrath skill. Eren kept staring at that castle, and finally revealed it used to belong to him. He explained that while he was away handling business, monsters had attacked his home. His son Luke had tried his best to defend everyone, but ended up getting isekai'd in the process. A leech lore had taken over the castle, and Eren knew his family was still trapped inside like prisoners. Fate started considering a rescue mission, and Eren decided to join him because sitting around feeling guilty wasn't working out. Mine agreed to protect the village in their absence, but only if they paid her 50 gold. They made their way to the castle where Fate shot a skeleton and turned it into stone, revealing he'd combined Sandstorm with his arrow to create a petrification attack. They carved through more skeletons as they went deeper into the castle, finally reaching a room where Eren was shocked to see his family waiting for him. His family told him they'd been waiting for his return, and Eren thought they were somehow still alive despite the whole monster invasion situation. But Greed dropped the harsh reality that they were already dead, and the leech was using illusion magic to make them appear alive. Luke suddenly attacked Eren, but he managed to block the strike and push his son back. Luke started ranting about how he despised Eren for abandoning his family to work in the capital, blaming him for everything that had happened to them. Fate considered using his scythe to dispel the illusion, but Greed warned that doing so would cause Fate's gluttony to consume his family's souls and send them to eternal torment. Eren declared he'd handle his family personally, so Fate went hunting for the main boss. He found the leech and checked its stats, discovering they were more ridiculous than a final boss in a pay-to-win mobile game. He managed to break its arms, but the thing summoned a group of zombies who were begging Fate to save them, putting him in the worst possible position since he couldn't attack innocent victims. Eren joined the fight and started taking down the zombies while having flashbacks to his last moments with his family. He remembered how they hadn't wanted him to leave, but he promised to return after completing his mission. He blamed himself for their deaths, knowing they'd still be alive if he'd come back sooner. But he was determined to put their souls to rest and use the Grand Cross skill, releasing a flash of holy light that unfortunately wasn't strong enough to defeat the leech. Fate spotted Luke's sword and decided to use it, combining his power with Eren's to use the Grand Cross together. They created a massive flash of light that instantly vaporized the leech and freed all the trapped souls in the castle. Eren's family appeared before him one last time, telling him not to blame himself for what happened and that he'd been able to save them in the end. He begged for forgiveness, saying they were more important than his duties, but they told him he should continue serving people because that's who he was. He promised to make them proud and gave Luke his sword as a souvenir before they finally found peace and disappeared. All the souls in the castle vanished, but the leeched core tried ruining the emotional moment, so Fate destroyed it and absorbed the leech's power. Later that evening, Eren discovered he'd broken his level limit, thinking it was because he'd been fighting alongside Fate. Greed revealed that Eren had been able to achieve this because he'd opened his heart to Fate, who possessed a deadly sin skill that apparently had some kind of power-boosting effect on allies. They returned to the village where Eren paid Mine for her bodyguard services. She mentioned needing money to rebuild her village, saying money didn't lie and Fate would understand what she meant when he got older. Eren revealed he'd seen her 50 years ago when she was already a perfect warrior, but her appearance hadn't changed at all. She told him he might reach her level after training for 1,000 years, but since he was only human, he wouldn't live that long anyway. She finally revealed that she was a phantom who wasn't allowed to die, which explained why she looked like she'd been frozen in time. Eren noticed that Fate's eyes had returned to normal and mentioned he needed to keep slaying monsters to prevent them from turning red again. Eren seemed to know about gluttony and told Fate to return to the village after his quest, because there was something important he needed to know. Meanwhile, the Vlarik family had acquired an artifact called the Philosopher's Stone, which supposedly had the power to cure anything, and Raphael's sister thought they were getting closer to achieving immortality. a servant delivered a report about Hado getting Istek hide by corpse, mentioning that corpse wasn't actually a monster but a warrior. Rafal wondered who this mysterious guy was and started planning revenge for his fallen brother. Fate and Mind kept traveling together, while Fate made his usual commentary about her bottomless pit of an appetite. But she actually shared some food with him this time before using his lap as her personal pillow for nap time. He tried getting some intel about her from Greed, but the weapon kept playing mysterious and told him he'd have to figure it out himself. Meanwhile, Roxy's expedition rolled up to Aaron's castle and were absolutely stunned that someone had already taken out the leech that was supposed to be there. Problem: Aaron greeted them, and Mugen paid his respects like he was meeting royalty. Roxy was about to introduce herself, but Aaron dropped the bombshell that he'd known her parents personally and had actually been the one to name her, making this the most awkward family reunion ever. They asked him how he'd managed to defeat the leech, and Aaron admitted he'd had some backup. When Roxy asked for the mysterious helper's name, we learned that Fate had specifically asked Aaron to keep his identity secret, so Aaron played dumb and said he couldn't reveal that information. Aaron could tell they were headed for Gallia and offered to give Roxy some training as her godfather, because apparently she needed all the help she could get. Fate and Mine arrived at some ancient ruins, and when Fate wondered where the heck they were, Mine revealed this was her birthplace, which explained why she seemed so comfortable in a creepy wasteland. They stumbled across a massive cocoon that looked like something out of a nightmare, and Greed identified it as a chimera, a weapons project from Gallia where some mad scientists had decided to play Frankenstein by patching different creatures together. Fate checked its stats and nearly had a heart attack because the numbers were more ridiculous than a final boss on impossible difficulty. But Mine thought they had a fighting chance since it was still basically in its immature state. She told him it was payback time, revealing that the thing couldn't die as long as its soul remained intact. Fate realized she wanted him to use his gluttony skill to literally eat its soul. Mine launched an attack on the cocoon, revealing the chimera inside, but there was a girl at its core. Fate didn't want to consume a human soul, but Mine told him it was just a monster wearing human skin like a creepy costume. The chimera decided to redecorate the battlefield by launching an attack that created a wave of lava, but Mine managed to stop it before they all became barbecue. She chopped off one of the chimera's arms, and Fate hit it with his petrifying arrows, but the thing shrugged off the attack and regenerated it immediately. Fate wondered what their next move should be while Mine continued her assault. He noticed she was even stronger than before, and Greed explained that the more she swung Sloth around, the stronger and heavier it became, but it also became harder to control. Unfortunately, their attacks weren't enough, and the creature started evolving. Mine told Fate to back off, but this reminded him of Roxy always having to save him, and he realized he was tired of being the damsel in distress. He refused to sit on the sidelines and activated his half-starvation mode. Seeing this, Mine warned him it was dangerous, but he ignored her concerns and sacrificed 10% of his stats to fire an upgraded petrification shot. Mine activated Sloth and knocked the chimera down, but the thing suddenly used a barrier skill to protect itself, so Fate switched to a more powerful black scythe to cut through its defenses. It pushed him back, but Greed told him to target the mana flow, which was its weakest point. This allowed him to shatter the barrier, causing the girl inside to cry out in pain. The chimera decided to try the aerial escape route and started flying away while Fate was reaching his physical limits. Mine told him to hop on her axe, and she launched him into the sky. Greed announced that Fate could now use the second stage of his ultimate attack at the cost of 20% of his stats, and Fate agreed to the upgrade despite the massive price tag. But as he got closer, the chimera trapped him in its barrier and prepared to turn them both into crispy critters. However, Fate delivered the finishing blow by stabbing the girl, which triggered his telepathy skill and gave him an unwanted front row seat to her tragic backstory. He discovered she'd known Mine in the past, and when his gluttony skill activated, instead of his usual excitement, he just felt her overwhelming loneliness. Greed explained this was because she was one of his kind, making the whole situation even more depressing. Later, they were standing at the girl's grave while Fate asked Mine how she'd known the victim. Mine said it was ancient history, but explained that once people became chimeras, they had to be put down, or they'd just cause more suffering for everyone else. Fate started worrying that the same thing could happen to him and asked Mine to isekai him if he ever stopped being himself. Mine hugged him but agreed to grant his request if he ever went berserk. Afterward, Fate prepared to head for Babylon, but Mine intended to rebuild her village instead of continuing their buddy cop adventure. However, she had a feeling he'd be dead before they met again. Fate had unlocked Greed's new form, which was a magic shield, but Mine called him an idiot for resetting his stats in such a dangerous place. So Fate begged her to help him hunt monsters so he could regain his power levels before she abandoned him. They ended up going their separate ways, and Fate made it to the city of Babylon, a fortress that stood between the kingdom and Gallia. Fate started looking for the gate, but Greed told him he was going the wrong direction, revealing he'd visited before with his previous wielder. When Fate asked about them, Greed explained they'd also had a deadly sin skill, but hadn't survived very long, which was about as reassuring as a life insurance salesman at a funeral. When they got inside the city, Fate couldn't believe how expensive everything was compared to the capital. But suddenly there was an announcement that the new lord had arrived, and people were getting excited to see Roxy like she was some kind of celebrity. While that went on, Fate suddenly sensed a strange presence lurking around, and it became clear that someone was planning to turn Roxy's welcome party into a funeral. The city of Babylon turned out to be a magnet for criminals because apparently their rap sheets would get wiped clean if they could prove they weren't completely useless in a fight. Fate figured the soldiers needed all the help they could get, making this the perfect place for someone with his particular skill set to blend in. Meanwhile, Roxy was meeting with Holy Knight Alistair, who was basically the head honcho running Babylon's operations. He revealed he'd been there when her father got isekai and was carrying around guilt heavier than a truck full of bricks for failing to protect him. But Roxy told him not to worry about it and promised to help him fight monsters, because she was too nice for her own good. Fate spotted a fancy scabbard in a shop window, and Greed told him to buy it. He met the shopkeeper, Jade, and asked about the item, but Jade explained it was just for display and offered to create a custom one for Fate's sword. When Fate showed him Greed, Jade's eyes lit up like he was looking at the Holy Grail, saying he could craft a scabbard for 500 gold. But Fate's wallet was emptier than a politician's promises, so he had to leave while complaining about how everything in this city was overpriced. A group of warriors started calling out to him and were about to invite him to join their party, but after taking one look at his sorry appearance, they decided he looked too weak to be worth their time and walked away. While hunting monsters, Fate noticed something floating in the air, and Greed warned him that the spores in the area were toxic enough to make breathing a health hazard. He encountered a group of orcs and prepared for battle, but the same warriors from earlier showed up and started stealing his isekai wins. Fate spotted another group of orcs approaching and realized they were planning to surround the warriors, so he charged in like a one-man cavalry. When they fired arrows at him, he whipped out Greed's new magic shield form and destroyed the projectiles like they were made of paper. Greed bragged that he could withstand any attack in shield mode and told Fate to rush the orcs, so he dashed forward, blocking their attacks while ramming his shield into them and taking them all out. After the fight, Fate was surprised that his gluttony skill wasn't acting up, since he usually struggled after consuming multiple souls. He figured his training with Aaron must have helped him get better control over his supernatural appetite. He headed to the exchange to sell his loot, but the warriors accused him of theft, claiming all the goods belonged to them. He told them to back off, but they kept pestering him and threatening to Unilev him, so he beat them up like they were practice dummies. He received 100 gold for his haul, and right then Roxy walked into the room asking if he was responsible for the mess. He explained he'd acted in self-defense, and she felt guilty for being unable to maintain order in her city. Instead of punishing him, she decided to throw the warriors in prison for the night so they could think about their life choices. Miria told Fate to remove his mask, but Roxy said it wasn't necessary. When she asked about his identity, he told her his name was Corpse. She found him strange and advised him to take better care of his appearance because he looked like he'd been living in a dumpster. As he walked around the city, Fate was relieved that Roxy hadn't recognized him, but he started thinking about his appearance and realized he couldn't afford to clean himself up even if he wanted to. That's when Jade approached him, revealing he'd just opened his shop and had a business proposition. Jade took him to his store and explained that he'd heard about what happened at the exchange and saw potential in Fate. He asked if Fate would wear a suit of armor for advertising purposes. Fate agreed to work with Jade, who offered him armor for 80 gold. Fate was shocked that Jade was charging him when he thought it was supposed to be free advertising, but after seeing his reaction, Jade decided to give him a discount. While wandering around the city in his new armor, Fate noticed a crowd gathering at a tavern and decided to investigate, but he got a weird feeling when he spotted a particular girl in the crowd. The girl approached him and told him she'd been waiting for him and already knew his identity, introducing herself as Eris, the sin of lust, because apparently his day wasn't complicated enough already. They spent time together, and Fate noticed he was getting strange feelings whenever he looked at her. Eris explained this was a side effect of her lust skill, which made people fall in love with her just by looking. She revealed she'd been watching him for a while and knew about his victory against the Chimera. But she dropped some bad news about more chimeras lurking in Gallia and her belief that the Holy Knights weren't strong enough to handle them. Then she revealed why she'd been waiting for him, explaining she was a guardian of the kingdom working toward a better future. But her idea of improvement involved Roxy dying in Gallia, which made Fate's blood pressure spike like a rocket. Eris explained the concept of aggression accumulation, where a monster's hatred lingered after death and built up over years until it created a crowned beast. She said the same thing could happen with humans, and since people hated the Holy Knights but loved Roxy, her death would accumulate massive aggression and eventually give birth to a powerful human who would serve the kingdom. But Fate wasn't about to let anyone hurt Roxy, so he got furious and decided to leave before he did something he'd regret. However, Eris calmly noted that the plan was already in motion and nothing could stop it. Roxy and her squad were busy fighting orcs and seemed to be winning, but Alistair was staring at Roxy with an expression that screamed, "I'm definitely plotting something sinister." He reported that they'd lost contact with a material gathering squad at the Great Canyon in Gallia, which made Roxy worry enough to immediately order a rescue mission because apparently she couldn't let anyone suffer on her watch. Meanwhile, Jade was explaining to Fate that he needed duskstone material for his scabbard, but had run completely out of stock. Greed suggested they go find the duskstone themselves, revealing it could only be found in Gallia. Jade marked a map for them, and they prepared to head off on their shopping trip from Hayes. Along the way, they encountered more orcs, but Fate plowed through them with his shield like he was bowling with monsters instead of pins. Roxy's group was also heading to the Great Canyon, but they were having navigation issues because compasses apparently didn't work in Gallia, making it the worst possible place for anyone with a poor sense of direction. However, Roxy figured out they could approximate their location by counting orcs, since there was an orc colony near the canyon. The more orcs they encountered, the closer they should be to their destination. Fate settled down for the night but found himself trapped in a nightmare that felt more real than he wanted. He saw the girl from the Chimera trying to tell him something, but he couldn't hear her words over some kind of supernatural static. Everything suddenly turned blood red, and all his fallen enemies emerged from the shadows, dragging him down into dark water. He woke up wondering what the heck that dream meant, but detected monsters approaching his camp. Using his night vision skill, he spotted 4 salamanders closing in. He shot one with his petrification arrows but noticed they were acting weird. Normally they'd run away after taking that kind of hit, but these ones kept coming. Greed theorized they were being controlled like remote-controlled death machines. The salamanders reached Roxy's camp and surrounded them from all sides. They started breathing fire and causing chaos, while Miria tried fighting back with her magic sword. Unfortunately, her attacks had about as much effect as throwing pebbles at a tank, and she got blown away like a leaf in a hurricane. One salamander prepared to turn Roxy into a midnight snack, but Fate arrived just in time to play hero. He took out all the salamanders and saved the day, with Roxy thanking him for the rescue. Fate pointed out strange markings on the salamanders' heads, and everyone found it bizarre that 4 crowned beasts would be working together. They seemed to be specifically targeting Roxy, which was about as concerning as finding a bomb with your name on it. They made it to the Great Canyon and split up to cover more ground. Fate continued exploring and discovered monsters that had been turned to stone. He spotted Eris up ahead and wondered what she was doing there, but she vanished before he could get answers. He stumbled across a chimera that wasn't moving, and Greed noted it didn't have a core, making it basically a monster-shaped decoration. But there were 2 other holes in the wall, suggesting there were 2 more active chimeras lurking around. The ground suddenly shook with an explosion coming from Roxy's direction, so Fate rushed toward the sound. Roxy's group was getting attacked by the 2 remaining chimeras, and Mugen got injured trying to protect Miria like a human shield. Fate arrived to save them, shooting at the chimeras while Greed observed that their regeneration was slower than the previous one they'd fought. Fate shared intel about the chimera's weakness, telling Roxy to aim for their cores. They charged in together, and when the chimera created a ring of fire around them, Fate's fire resistance made him immune to the barbecue treatment. The chimera tried protecting its core, but Fate cut its legs to create an opening, and Roxy delivered the finishing blow. There was still 1 more left, but it decided to try the aerial approach by jumping into the sky. They prepared to attack it when it landed, but instead it caused the ground to split apart. Fate and Roxy fell through the crack, but Fate grabbed onto her to protect her with his body. When Fate woke up, he saw how far they'd fallen and started panicking when he realized his mask was missing. Roxy was starting to wake up, but he managed to find his mask and get it back on before she could see his face. He used fire magic to light up their underground prison and asked if she'd managed to find her lost squad, but she sadly told him she couldn't save them. She asked how he knew so much about chimeras, and he explained that a Gallian had taught him about them. Roxy deduced it was mine and mentioned rumors about her traveling with a man in a skull mask. Fate admitted it was him, and Roxy seemed pleased with her detective skills. Fate got embarrassed from her staring, but she mentioned how he reminded her of someone she knew. She started thinking about this person and hoping they were happy, while Fate said that person was lucky to have her thinking about them. But then his gluttony started acting up, and one of his eyes turned red. He didn't want Roxy to see him in monster mode, so he ran away before she could notice. He sensed the remaining chimera was nearby and went to handle it. The chimera emerged for their final boss battle, but Fate attacked its core with his scythe while thinking about how Roxy would look at him if she knew what he really was. He destroyed the chimera but noticed the same markings from the salamanders, confirming that Roxy was being specifically targeted. Greed deduced this had to be Eris's doing because apparently she wasn't content with just threatening Roxy. She was actively trying to unalive her. Roxy caught up with him and they ended up finding the dusk stone he'd been looking for, making this the only successful shopping trip in the entire dangerous adventure. They returned to the city where Roxy challenged Fate to a duel while Miria accused him of causing trouble around town. He explained he'd just been defending himself since people kept trying to pick fights with him, but Roxy told him she couldn't overlook his actions and suggested he join her army since nobody would mess with them. When he refused her generous offer, she prepared to fight him and told him to draw his sword. He left his sword in its scabbard, making Roxy think he was underestimating her abilities. She warned him she wouldn't hold back, and they started their duel. Fate was confused about why he couldn't overpower her even though his stats were supposedly higher, until he realized her technique was superior to his brute force approach. She managed to land a hit that left a crack in his mask and threatened to expose his identity if he didn't fight seriously. So he finally unleashed the power of his scabbard. Everyone recognized it as a holy sword skill, and he'd explained that the scabbard was made from dusk stone, which improved his holy sword techniques. He charged at her and managed to overpower her, but just as he was about to end the fight, he spotted the amulet she was wearing and recognized it, causing him to freeze up. Roxy took advantage of his distraction to disarm him and secure victory, but she wondered why he'd suddenly let his guard down. He refused to answer her question, probably because explaining would require revealing too many secrets. She recognized his fighting style and asked if he'd learned it from Aaron, revealing she'd encountered Aaron during her journey. Aaron had mentioned a traveler with immense power, and she wondered if he'd been referring to Fate. But Fate told her to focus on her mission instead of playing detective. He talked to Mugen about how someone had been controlling the chimeras, and Mugen explained that the creatures were using monsters as their cores. He revealed that his family had studied Gallian technology and that his daughter Rain was a gifted scholar. Since Fate knew chimeras were artificial creatures made in Gallia, he wanted to meet her and get some answers. Meanwhile, Rain was working in her lab when a colleague told her about Raphael studying the Philosopher's Stone. She decided to investigate, and while the stone granted extraordinary powers to its wielder, it completely dominated their body. Back to Fate, who was remembering his conversation with Mine about the domain of E, where she told him he wouldn't be able to defeat the divine dragon until he reached that level. He was wondering how he was supposed to achieve that when everyone suddenly heard an alarm. Alistair informed Roxy that monsters were approaching the city, so she gathered her troops and charged at the threat. Fate watched from a distance, thinking she should be able to handle the situation without any problems. But then he spotted a massive monster moving underground and approaching her army for a surprise attack. So he decided to interfere before Roxy became Monster Chow. Greed transformed into bow mode, and Fate used his gluttony skill to supercharge his arrow, allowing him to fire a powerful shot from long range that pierced through the ground and forced the monster to surface. He lunged at the creature and used his Identify skill to check its stats, immediately realizing it was extremely powerful and Roxy didn't stand a chance against it. The monster summoned acid rain and Fate defended with his shield, while Greed warned him that the corrosion magic would unalive him if he touched it. Fate switched to his magic bow and fired a powerful arrow that caused a massive explosion, but the monster disappeared and tried to escape. He realized it had survived by splitting its body and was now heading straight for Roxy, so he chased after it while smaller copies attacked him. He used his Grand Cross skill to destroy them instantly, realizing this wasn't behaving like a normal monster and figuring it was being controlled by someone. He jumped underground to search for the monster's core, and as he charged up his most powerful arrow, the monster appeared for their final confrontation. Just as he was about to finish it off, bullets suddenly hit the monster from somewhere else. His arrow caused an explosion, and a voice told him he consumed the monster's soul, but it was still alive somehow. Fate became confused about how anything could survive without its soul. He spotted a masked man watching the battle, so Fate lunged at him and Greed recognized the weapon the man was using as another mortal sin. Envy. The monster surrounded Fate while Greed explained it had been hit by a magic bullet that activated its hidden power, allowing it to create copies of its soul like some kind of supernatural backup system. It tried to melt his body with acid, but Fate consumed the monster instead, revealing he'd found a way to counter its corrosion magic. He shot the masked man, but a barrier protected him like he had his own personal force field. Greed explained that Fate's stats had reached their limit, and he'd need to reach the domain of E to go any further. But he was still no match for this guy who was already operating at that level. Fate charged in anyway, and the man blocked his attack before pushing him away like he was swatting a fly. The man used Envy to fire magic bullets, while Fate tried blocking with his shield, but he still felt the force of the attack enough to cough up blood. As the man prepared to finish him off, Fate realized he needed to get stronger immediately or become a casualty. He made a desperate bargain with his gluttony skill, saying he was willing to do whatever it took to break his limit and begging for the power he needed. He reached the domain of E and attacked the man, forcing him to retreat. The man summoned monsters to attack Fate, but Fate told them not to interfere and ran right past them. He continued pursuing the man, dodging magic bullets and creating a smokescreen to mess with his vision. Fate appeared behind him and destroyed his mask, revealing his identity. It turned out to be Alistair, but he didn't seem bothered by being exposed. Alistair played a flute that summoned the divine dragon, because apparently he'd been saving his trump card for last. The dragon headed straight for Roxy, so Fate rushed to reach her while Alistair tried to stop him. Roxy's army was fighting monsters when the divine dragon made its grand entrance. Mugen ordered everyone to retreat, and as the dragon approached Roxy, it fired a powerful energy beam that blew everyone away, but Fate protected her with his shield, and the force of the attack shattered his mask, making him realize he could no longer hide his secret identity from the person he'd been trying to protect all along. Roxy was shocked to see his face and looked absolutely stunned as she stared into his eyes like she was seeing a ghost. He apologized for lying to her all this time but told her to retreat while he bought them some time against the world's angriest dragon. He confronted the beast using his Grand Cross skill and managed to trap it in a prison of light. Alistair shot at him, and they started fighting again, but Fate seemed to be struggling more than usual. Alistair pointed out that maintaining his skill was draining too much power, so Fate didn't stand a chance in a prolonged fight. Fate failed to land any meaningful hits, and Alistair managed to cut off his arm, which was definitely not part of Fate's battle plan. Alistair prepared to deliver the finishing blow, but suddenly got stabbed from behind as Fate revealed he used illusion magic to fake his defeat and cut Alistair down. His gluttony skill activated, and he suddenly found himself surrounded by white light. He saw the girl from Mind's memory again, and she introduced herself as Luna while thanking him for isekaiing her. She apologized as the floor started cracking beneath them, saying she could no longer hold on. Fate realized she'd been the one keeping his gluttony from going completely berserk, and she warned him that devouring the divine dragon would cause him to lose himself completely. The floor crumbled away, but Greed caught him before he could fall into whatever abyss awaited below. Fate was shocked to see Greed in person, but his weapon told him they needed to leave immediately. He thanked Luna for her warning, but resolved to defeat the dragon anyway, because apparently he was committed to this self-isekai adventure. They made it back outside where the dragon had broken free from his skill. Greed wondered what Fate planned to do with only one arm, but Fate suddenly threw him and charged at the dragon, punching it with his remaining fist before proceeding to slice and dice it. As the dragon fell, it fired an energy blast at him in a last-ditch effort to take him down, but Fate boosted his stats using his overload skill, cut through the blast, and split the dragon in half with one devastating strike. The dragon crashed through the ground while Fate's gluttony devoured its soul. He felt intense pain as his power threatened to consume him completely, and he was about to go berserk and potentially destroy everything around him. But he sacrificed all his stats to unlock Greed's final form, preventing himself from becoming a walking disaster zone. Mine appeared and noted that he'd let his skill consume him, so Fate asked her to finish him off and keep their promise. She prepared to end his suffering, but Roxy suddenly saved him from his own death wish. He told her not to look at him in his monstrous state, but she cried for him, saying she didn't care what kind of power he had and that she liked him for who he was, begging him not to die. Strangely, he felt his gluttony calming down at her words, and Roxy told him to come back with her. He was relieved that she accepted him even after learning the truth about his supernatural curse, and he collapsed in her lap like he'd finally found peace. When Fate woke up, he found himself back in the city after what felt like the worst power nap ever. Eris and Mine visited him and revealed he'd been unconscious for an entire week. Eris handed him Greed, and Fate noticed how dirty his weapon had gotten during his absence. Eris mentioned that Mine had forgotten to bring Greed back, but she'd been busy dealing with envy and revealed it had mind control powers, meaning Alistair had been manipulated rather than acting on his own evil impulses. Fate wondered what they'd done with envy since it was supposedly indestructible, and Mine casually revealed she'd just thrown it away somewhere. Eris noted that since their experiment using Roxy to create a crowned human had failed spectacularly, they'd need his help in the future. Fate agreed to cooperate, but only on the condition that she promised to leave Roxy alone, because apparently he'd learned to negotiate even while recovering from near-death experiences. Eris told him they should leave before Roxy returned, explaining it was dangerous for him to see her because just hearing her name seemed to make his gluttony unstable. Roxy came to visit him, but he'd already vanished, leaving only a note behind. He explained everything about his curse to her, and promised to return one day when he could control his power. While she thought about how he'd always given her courage, a flashback showed their first meeting, where young Fate had been scared of her because he thought all holy knights were bullies. She realized how people perceived them and felt ashamed, apologizing to him, but his stomach growled at the worst possible moment, so she ended up sharing her food with him. He was glad to meet a good holy knight, and she was able to feel proud of herself for the first time. She wondered when they'd meet again and promised to get stronger so she could protect him instead of the other way around. In the present, Fate was using Greed's new staff form and managed to restore his severed arm. Eris and Mine went their separate ways, leaving Fate to set off with Greed on a journey to find a way to control his gluttony before it consumed him completely. If you enjoyed this recap, smash the like button and comment clap in the comments section. Also, subscribe to the channel if you're yet to for more action plot-filled adventures. If you want another anime recap like this, watch this video right here.